Hello everybody, and welcome to my showcase of all of the Tier 1 Mana and Artifice spells. So when you get into Tier 1 of Mana and Artifice, you'll be able to craft this thing called the inscription table. And if you open it up, it will give you this little menu here, where it will tell you these various spell components, and each of these different spells has its own effect. So I am going to be telling you guys what each of those effects are. Additionally, there are a few other smaller spells known as cantrips that you can cast using your mana weaving wand that I'm also going to be showing the effect of. So before you cast one of your cantrips, you first will have to craft a mana weaving wand, whether it be improvised, vintium, or chimmerite. The different types of them are naturally it's progressive. So the improvised mana weaver wand only has 5 uses, while the vintium has 25, and the chimmerite has infinite durability. The improvised can be crafted with a variety of things. Just the main thing is that you have some form of a magical item on top and then some form of stick on the bottom. While the Vintium Mana Weaver's wand has Vintium ingots and some Vintium dust, as well as 2 sticks. And the Chimmerite Mana Weaver wand, which you only need to have 1 of because they have infinite durability. They require 2 Chimmerite, a purified Vintium dust, and 2 sticks. For this demonstration, I am going to be using the Chimmerite Mana Weaver wand. So when you hold down the control key and then left click, it opens up this menu here. And this menu has all the different cantrips. So I'm going to be describing what these cantrips do shortly. But first of all, when you select a cantrip, such as the Ignite cantrip, you can cycle through what symbols are needed to be drawn. So you can have 3 shapes to be drawn, or you can have it be that, there has to be at least 2 shapes, but you can make it so that those 2 shapes are easier or harder to draw, respectively. So the first cantrip that I have here is the Ignite cantrip. I have it set to be a square and a slash, and what it does is that it creates a little fire where you're looking when the cantrip's done. So I'm going to just show that again. You draw out the cantrip, and then it will create a little fire. The transmute cantrip is very interesting. So what it does is that it will turn copper blocks into transmuted silver, stone into arcane stone, sandstone into arcane sandstone, and gravel into flint. And the way that it works is that when you draw it out, you get this little effect here, and then you look at blocks, and then boom. As you can see, we now have arcane sandstone instead of sandstone. This is useful because before you can craft your mana weaving altar, or rune forges if you want to create them the cheaper way, you have to have some arcane sandstone and stone. So it's very useful to cast that cantrip a few times just to start using the mana weaving altar. Our next cantrip is Signal Flare. It's pretty simple. It is it's a signal flare. It's just a little firework. That's it. It's nothing fancy. But when you get into Tier 3, it will summon a ally, which is extremely useful because at that point you've chosen a faction, which means that you will have a faction allied creature at your side for a limited time. And the last cantrip is the Gust cantrip, which I'm going to be demonstrating a little off in the distance. So what the Gust cantrip does is the same exact thing as what the Gust spell component does, is that when you cast it, as you can see, it just kind of clears up all of the nearby areas. I didn't show what it was, but it clears up leaves, grass, flowers, snow, and any variety of those things. So it's kind of useful for when you want to clear stuff up en masse, particularly if you're in, say, a plains biome, because, plains biomes are just full of leaves, and you're just like, you know what, I'm just gonna dust all of them away. And that would be it for our cantrips, so I'm going to say goodbye to my Chimmerite wand, and now I'm going to be talking about the big things, the spells themselves. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using the Book of Rote. You're not going to have access to this, but you can craft it at a later point. However, I'm going to be demonstrating all the different spells using this. Just to note that you're not going to have access to this if you're only in Tier 1. Now, I mentioned the inscription table earlier, and the way that this works is that you select one of these star components, and this is what the spell affects, and then this other part is the spell's effect. So in this case, I will have a Touch Pack spell, or if I were to do this, this would be a Self-Collapse spell. And you can see a few things here. You can see the complexity of the spell. That's limited by tier. When you get to the maximum tier, the complexity becomes, I believe, 999, so there's no complexity limit at that point. as well as the mana cost, which is shown up here. And then you also have how much I struggle pronouncing this, the Arcanist's ink, how much of that it will consume, that you have to put that up there, how many vellum it consumes, you have to put those up there, and how many arcane ash it consumes. Then when you do that, you click that arrow. If I were in survival mode, it would then scribe it out and then give me the recipe, which would require me to perform the Ritual of Arcana with these ingredients and the spell scroll. But because I'm in creative mode, it just would create the full version. However, because I am in creative mode, I also have access to the Book of Rote, so I'm just going to be using that to combine these spells as I wish for demonstration purposes. So like I said, in this tier we have two of these star components. So you have the self and touch component. The self component, what it does is that it makes the spell effect affect yourself. So if you were to choose, say, the fire damage component, you would zap yourself with fire damage. Not a wise idea. But if you're to do it with the touch component, it affects somebody else within touching range, in this case 3 blocks. So if I were to zap it here, as you can see, it sets the block on fire. So with that said and done, I'm going to be covering each of these components on several of these spells. So the break spell, in this case, you have to have it with touch because it has to affect somebody else. I'm going to be using the touch break spell. Now what it does is that it impacts things up to what a stone pickaxe can mine. So this is a stone, it mines it, and then iron, it mines it. It's kind of a simple spell. You just right-click and it breaks the block. There are several magical items that make it even more powerful, such as these break rings. You can craft them at later tiers, and it will make it so then you can actually break the higher tier stuff. For example, I can't break these because a stone pickaxe can't harvest obsidian or diamond ores. But if I were to equip the various break rings, as you can see, I can now break that one, but not this one. And now I equip the higher tier, and now I can break that. There also are other magical items that can affect the break spell, but for now, that is all that I'm going to be covering. Although those break rings are not available in Tier 1, it is potentially a good idea to rush to get to Tier 2 if you use the break spell as your main use of mining. So you can then break everything instead of just, like iron ore or stone. But that is it for the break spell. If you do it on yourself, it won't actually do anything. Just like, why did you do this to yourself? The next spell component is going to be the collapse component. So this is an external one, which means that we have to apply it to other people. If we apply it to ourselves, nothing will happen. So this is something that we are going to have to touch. So the collapse component is quite interesting. So what it does is that it will make it so that a block, such as these two here, will fall as if they are sand, and it will last for a few seconds, depending on your duration. Okay, never mind, I just did a quick test. It will last however long it takes for the block to fall. So, if you're building on a sky island and you use this spell, you should probably be wary of impacting things you don't want to. But that's the collapse spell. It just makes it so that stuff acts as if it is sand or gravel. The crystallize spell is a spell that I love a lot. You have to have it be applied to other people. If you apply it to yourself, it'll just not do anything, which is kind of lame. But if you have it impact other people, you can then capture a creature, boop, as a crystalline cage. There are some mobs that won't work, such as iron golems. However, you can just kind of boop, capture them up, and now you can put them down somewhere else. So it's a bit like the trapping nets. I know that used to be a mod. The next component is Earth Sky, which, similar to all of these, it has to be an external component. And what Earth Sky does is the exact opposite of collapse. And this one does have a duration of 3 seconds. So if you click this block here, as you can see, it's going to slowly float up for 3 seconds, and then it just stays there. This would be helpful for the creation of said floating island. But now I'm going to reverse this spell with collapse, just make it pop all the way back down. And you guys may occasionally see me double up on the spells. That is accidental. I do not intend to do this. Only the first spell is really going to matter for this. The next spell component is the exchange component. So the way that this works is that you click a block, and then it will exchange it with whatever is in your offhand. So if you cast it with nothing in your main hand, it just won't do anything. Similarly, if you do it with self, nothing will happen. But if you hold either the spell or the block in the offhand with a component that actually works, it will exchange it. So now I'm going to switch back into the quartz blocks and into here. So as you can see, it kind of just switches them out. not extremely useful, but, you know, if you're really needing to not actually mine the thing while mining it, it works. So the felled oak spell is very interesting, so I'm going to grab some saplings here to demonstrate. This is another external one, so you're going to want to apply it to other people, not yourself. And what this does is that it will make it so that if you have a tree, it will just break it all. Saplings, too. So it allows for extremely quickly tree collection, including for super big spruce trees like this. Boom! Harvested. But you may notice that there is a little bit left on top, so it actually may be a good idea to start at the top and then work your way down to the bottom, because you may accidentally leave a few floating trees in the area. The next spell is one that I already sort of showed earlier, which would be the fire damage spell. The fire damage spell is what it describes. It does 5 damage by default. You can increase that, of course, at later tiers, but, you know, just as it's a fire. It's like the Ignite cantrip, but significantly more useful. If I were to summon in a little friend here and zap them, you can see that they took 5 damage, plus the bits of, like, flame damage afterwards. So, boom, I got the Monster Hunter achievement by dealing them with fire damage. Fire damage is extremely helpful, but so is the Fling spell. The Fling spell is the first spell that is actually useful for both touch and self. Although I recommend using it with self, so I'm going to demonstrate it with touch. What it does is that it flings the creature, launching them away. However, if you do it for yourself, as you can see, it launches yourself, which is a kind of easy form of transportation, especially if you interval with jumps. As you can see, it kind of rivals creative mode flight, just because it's like super duper fast. Fling is my absolute favorite spell. It just is super useful. I highly recommend you get it as soon as you can. Gust, it's the same exact thing as the cantrip, except it's actually significantly worse. This is the only spell in which the cantrip form is better. So I'm going to put down the sapling, which is one of the things that impacts them. Whoop-de-doo, you broke a sapling. And unlike the cantrip, where it would impact, say, all 9 of these, the cantrip impacts, like, a 7x5 area around you or something ridiculous like that. This only impacts 1 at a time. This is probably the worst spell in this list. And here's actually a good one. The light spell. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's just a light. You put it down and it's a little torch, which means that you don't have to carry around torches anymore, which extremely helpful. And it also does have an effect when you use it on mobs, which I forgot to provide. So here's a husk. I'm going to zap him with the light spell, and as you can see, he is now glowing. Well, that's not like a super useful effect that, like, it's not going to kill them like fire damage, but if you were to get a Book of Route and apply them in tandem, you could potentially at a later point just light and glowing on them in order to be able to see them if they, say, walk behind a wall. But for tier 1, light should be used to create lights. Because that's what the spell is meant to do. I guess you also could use light on yourself if you want to, if you really need to get the glowing effect for some reason. Maybe the How Did We Get Here enchantment needs this, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that if you really needed to get the glowing effect, you could shoot yourself with a spectral arrow, or make suspicious looking soup. The pact spell is an interesting one, but not necessarily one that I would create. Once more, it has no effect on self, so I'm just going to switch it over to affecting other people. So the pact spell, I just needed to create a little hole in the ground. So it's actually kind of like an automatic TNT cleaner-upper, or creeper cleaner-upper, more accurately. So the way that the spell works is that if you have a flat area that is open compared to its surroundings, you just click and nothing will happen unless you have an item in your offhand. And as you can see, boop, it just fills it on up and it will continue to fill it up. If I were to click in there, as you can see, it fills up quite a bit. I'm going to click in here. And you do actually have to click it in a bit of a wonky way because, as you can see, it does not impact out to 3, but if I were to put the block in here and then click here, it then will fill it in. So it's a little bit wonky, but if you're filling in creeper holes, I mean, I guess it's useful. I assume that it becomes better the more range you put on it. I personally haven't experienced it very much because it's kind of a useless spell. However, if you do fill up a bunch of creeper holes, this probably could be the spell for you if you have a bit of extra dirt. The shears spell I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this. It shears the thing. So you have a pumpkin. I'm going to shear it. You have a sheep. I am going to shear it. It's a extremely complex spell. And we also have the slow spell. I feel like this also should be somewhat self-explanatory. So we have a mob. They are now impacted by the slowness effect, but it's an extremely short-lasting spell. Just lasting for 1 second. So it's not like the most useful thing in the world. Just, you maybe should use a different spell. And the thing is, there's even a better alternative to this in Tier 2, so this spell just immediately becomes redundant. But I guess if you want to impact a nearby husk with slowness for maybe 1 second, this is the spell for you. Although, you also could apply it to yourself. But even then, it's still useless. This takes the cake for a worse spell. At Tier 1 at least. At later points you can make it better. But for now, no. You should not be making it. Next few spells are pretty self-explanatory. They are summon anvil, so if you do it to self, it'll just give you the anvil, like, inventory. If you do it to touch, it will summon a spectral anvil that you can use for the same, but I'm pretty sure that this will go away after, like, a few seconds. You can summon a spectral anvil, a spectral stone cutter, and a spectral crafting bench. All of these functioning like their associated tool. Like, if I had some stone, I could put it in here, turn it into, like, stone bricks. Or I could craft something. These 3 spells are just general useful utility spells to make it so that you don't have to, say, craft a bunch of crafting tables when you are going out. But if you affect it on yourself, it just makes it so that you open up the inventory. So that's probably the more useful variation of this. But if you really are lacking in the materials to create a self version, you absolutely can create the touch variation. However, that concludes my video on the Tier 1 spells and Mana and Artifice. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's kind of hard to cover all these spells. It's going to be even worse for Tier 2 because I'm going to have to double check with this list to make sure that I'm not covering a formerly covered spell, which is always fun. But either way, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about the spells, such as Pack, wherever it is, it's just such a weird spell. It's so inconsistent. However, you know, I hope you guys have a very good day, and I will see you guys around for the part 2 to this video, where I'm going to be covering the Tier 2 spells, which there are significantly more of them, as well as more components for this. So I'm going to have to cover the self, touch, and I believe projectile version. There's just going to be so many different things when it gets down to that level, which is the reason why I break it down to, does it impact the player or impact something around them? Because these are just, it's going to get wonky. But with that, I hope you guys have a very good day, and I will be seeing you guys around.